Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Camila Torres got off the hospital couch and wiped her abdomen with a damp cloth. The doctor smeared her abdomen with a special gel to ensure the ultrasound sensor glided smoothly over her skin. The familiar doctor smiled encouragingly at her. "Camila, you never cease to amaze. It's your first pregnancy, and you'll have twins. Your young man will be thrilled. He's a paramedic, isn't he? Works in emergency services?" "Yes, he's an anesthesiologist intensivist with a degree in this field. He has been working for 3 years now." "But I don't think this news will excite him," Camila replied. "Why's that?" The talkative woman instantly became intrigued. "Doesn't he like children?" "Worse, we haven't been that close yet." Believe it or not, she adjusted her medical uniform, attempted to smile, but only managed a feeble grimace. Her heart felt bitter and lonely. The feeling of hopelessness engulfed her again from all sides, as if she had once again crossed the threshold of uncertainty about her fate. Yet she only knew about her misfortunes from the chatty carers in the orphanage. She couldn't remember them herself. And those carers could embellish, embroider, and invent the truth. An orphan once more, feeling the influence of an ill fate. It had been looming over her and influencing her since the day she was left in a cardboard box at the doorstep of a tiny house in a small provincial town. How many children on this earth were abandoned by their parents in such a ruthless manner? The gynecologist was initially taken aback by her visit, then composed herself. But she stopped asking the young woman questions. It wasn't her job to solve puzzles. This pretty nurse might have all sorts of life circumstances. She had been working in the gynecological department for so long that she knew well that women have children, not always from husbands and steady partners. She had witnessed family secrets revealed through blood type or other parameters. The true father of a child was always unknown. Sometimes even the woman herself didn't know who it could be. After all, women had affairs with more than one lover. Camila walked through the hospital grounds, oblivious to her surroundings. Why was the sun shining so brightly? Why was the sky beckoning with its endless blue? And why were those birds chirping? Spring, love, romance, it was all deceitful. There was nothing beautiful in relationships between men and women if the main thing in their relationship was to make love. Take her boyfriend, for example, the young doctor from emergency services. He stuck to his principles. At the beginning of their relationship, he once tried to bring her home, whispering, "I'll surprise you now, baby." Camila pushed his insistent hands away. "Otilio, I'm not ready. I've never had such close relationships with anyone before." He laughed spitefully at her. "Are you innocent, you say? Well, that's news. I can wait. I'll wait until you ask me yourself." A month later, Camila learned that Otilio was calmly sleeping with a nurse from the cardiology department, and while with her, he started behaving like a brother to a naive younger sister. Movies, cafes, pastry shops, amusement parks. He didn't even attempt to kiss her anymore, as if a wall had appeared between them. An unloved man. It was funny to name him like this. Just friend. But she hesitated to completely break up with him. After all, everyone in the hospital still thought they were a couple. Camila was an absolute, unreserved orphan. She was all alone in the world. First, there was a string of state-run orphanages, then she entered a medical school with a red diploma, and then she had a fairly comfortable, spacious room in a small apartment almost in the center of the old town, as legally prescribed. No one wanted to adopt her, everyone was put off by her story. Who knew what kind of careless parents she had? What if they were marginal characters, paupers, or alcoholics? Dealing with bad genetics afterward. She decided to pursue a career in medicine back in the orphanage. She fancied herself a heroine when she skillfully bandaged the lively boy's scraped knee with the torn sleeve of her own dress. She went to accompany the boy, writhing in pain, to the infirmary and fell in love with that magical room with shiny metal instruments on trays. She had no fear of syringes, tweezers, pristine bandaging material, iodine, or hydrogen peroxide bottles. Even the scents of chlorine and camphor seemed divine to her. Camila was a determined young woman. While her peers secretly smoked cigarettes behind the utility block in the orphanage, she studied biology and chemistry. Even the privileges accorded to orphans were of no use when applying to the school she managed on her own. She passed the entrance exams with flying colors. 2 years and 10 months of study flew by like a single day, and then her 18th birthday came. The specialty of nursing might not have been the most prestigious in the world, but in her own newly acquired apartment, with a diploma in hand, Camila felt like a fully grown, independent person. She found a job quickly, although she had almost no experience. She was noticed by the head of the oncology department of the city hospital even during her internship. When Camila entered the ward, all the patients started smiling, forgetting their pain for a moment. There was so much genuine human warmth in her. Despite hardly knowing love in her own life, she loved people selflessly and, one might say, devotedly. She was forgiving and yielding, even if someone unintentionally offended her. Where did she find the strength to devote relentless attention to all the suffering? Such compassionate specialists in the tragic department, from which not everyone returned home, were worth their weight in gold. And everything around her was always clean, neat, tidy, and well organized, whether she was on her nursing shift or in each patient's room. Such a person didn't provoke the desire to insult, humiliate, or harm them. But even among the generally good-natured patients, there was always a black sheep. Salvador ended up in the grim department through connections. His aunt worked here as a doctor. She was well respected. She was a surgeon with years of experience. She had saved so many patients from the brink of death. He urgently needed to resolve the army issue in a positive way, up to the point of being declared unfit for service at all. If only that were possible. The contrast between him, feigning suspicion of gastric oncology, and those who were actually sick was colossal. The haughty young man was a giant externally without any obvious signs of a terrible ailment, but it was not customary in the hospital to poke one's nose into other people's business. If a hospital bed was allocated to a patient, it meant it was necessary. Everything would have been fine, but Salvador got bored. Then he noticed Camila, petite, quiet, polite, wouldn't say a bad word about anyone. He had already asked his aunt about the employee he got interested in. She was an orphan, and there was no one to protect her. Where was her mythical knight from the emergency services? He was here. He decided on a weekend, when the staff was sparse, to entertain himself a little. He dragged the girl into a storage room where mattresses, pillows, and bedding were kept. Camila was stunned by such audacity, unable to speak, as if her whole body had been encased in iron shackles. Salvador even silenced her with his hand over her mouth. When he realized the girl was innocent, he became even more emboldened. What a surprise! What a gift! You see, keep quiet. I'll keep my mouth shut too. If you say a word about what happened here, you'll be fired in no time. You won't lose anything, go on, you're free, Salvador said. Camila flew out of the storage room in fear, nervously scanning the corridor. There was silence. All the girls on duty had left to have coffee and sweets after dinner. There were many sweet gifts today due to discharges. She carefully examined her clothes and tidied herself up. What had happened soon seemed to her like some terrible absurd dream, and soon Salvador was discharged too. Even though Camila had a medical education, she didn't immediately realize that the incident with the vile patient had serious consequences. Her pregnancy didn't bring any nausea or other discomfort. When she came to her senses, the fetus was already about 8 weeks old. She wasn't scared, she was upset that she wouldn't be able to provide for her baby with her income. Being a bitter orphan herself, she didn't even allow herself to consider getting rid of the child. It wasn't his fault that his father was a real animal. And besides, he had her, his mother, and she wouldn't abandon him under any circumstances. She felt repulsed thinking of seeking help from Salvador through his aunt. Let no one know who the father of her baby was. Now, finding out on the ultrasound that she would soon become the mother of 2 children and that her belly would soon start showing as she was 4 months pregnant, Camila was in despair. Her offspring would be poor, just like herself. She didn't want such a cruel fate for her blood. She felt awful, but she had to go to work. The patients weren't to blame for the fact that everything in her life was about to change soon, and it wasn't clear in which direction. Strong, determined, and courageous. That's how Valerio Alonso's inner circle would characterize him, from his young wife to his partners and friends. He had managed to bury the sorrows of the past deep in his soul. He always greedily enjoyed the present, optimistically looking to the future. He was like a rock, like granite or a diamond, on which circumstances couldn't leave a scratch. Where will all this go now, he thought. I'm soon going to turn into a powerless creature, obedient to the orders of excruciating pain. My treating doctor was honest with me. A couple of months is all I have left in this world. I'm already barely tolerating the agony from one injection to the next. Oncology is the physical torment. In my case, it turned out to be too advanced. The sentence is irrevocable. What do people who know for sure that they have little time left to live think about? Who knows? They probably each think about their own. It's very scary for them. The question arises inevitably, why was such a fate destined for me? Why did fate make such a choice? Valerio Alonso, a wealthy businessman with $1 million fortune and the hereditary owner of a large metallurgical corporation, was thinking about his beloved woman. How would she, so fragile and delicate, survive without him in this harsh world? He even forbade her from visiting the oncology department of the city hospital frequently. It was not proper for him, a mature 55-year-old man, to involve such a carefree creature in the web of his and others' suffering. He wanted to leave this world on his own, without unnecessary witnesses, as much as he loved this woman. He grumbled even when his old father came to visit him. He invented reasons why he would be better off not coming there. Either he had the important tests, he'd only get in the way, or he was tired and wanted to be alone. Why bother coming across the whole city? His father didn't want to give in, stubbornly resisting his prohibitions. Christina didn't object. She fluttered into his room like a bright exotic butterfly, leaving behind a trail of sophisticated perfume and spring freshness. She pecked him on the cheek, telling him about the shops and salons she had visited in recent days. She loved driving recklessly and exploring new places where her beauty was cherished, pampered, and worshipped. It was an old habit of a former model who had stopped modeling at her husband's request, but hadn't changed her old habits. They met 12 years ago in Sicily, where everything was conducive to romantic adventures. Christina was starring in a series of commercials in the town of Taormina. This small architectural masterpiece by the sea, perched atop a hill, served as an excellent backdrop. According to the director's idea, the heroine would enter the village through one of the gates, then wander through the narrow streets, where the landladies left huge tubs of indoor flowers on the steps of private houses, or sailed to the islet of Olabella, where exotic animals and birds roamed. The colorful vignettes encouraged the purchase of sunglasses, without which having a rest was impossible in hot Italy and indeed on all southern beaches. Christina changed outfits and smiled on her face, and she looked flawless in the frame, even despite the glaring sun and heat. Valerio, watching from afar the efforts of the film crew suffering in the heat, was thus spending his time on a mini vacation. A meeting with Italian partners on the mainland was scheduled in 3 days. In Sicily, he intended to visit places of criminal fame from his favorite movie, with actor Al Pacino in the lead role. And then cross the sea straight from the city of Messina, where, on clear days, the outlines of the mainland opposite were distinctly visible. So to speak, we wanted to combine business with a pleasant pastime. The resort romance with Christina happened on the seashore like an exotic, bright flower. It was hot and passionate, burning with its fire not only the man and the woman but also everything around them. For the first time in years, Valerio fell head over heels in love, and Christina responded in kind. She didn't ask for gifts or money, she greedily wanted only him, completely melting in the arms of her admirer. Drawing him into walks, into the hotel room, and into shady cafes. She made only one simple condition: she wanted to be alone with him. Valerio was losing his head, but he didn't want to resist it. After a family tragedy that happened many years ago, he was living and breathing freely again. Misfortune had retreated into the shadows. Behind the successful businessman, there were already 2 failed marriages, early and hasty. One, as usual, was a college one. It was ruined by everyday life within a few months. Pretty Luz was horrified at the sight of pans and pots, and he didn't want to milk his father for extra money. Their family was about to stand on its feet. His father worked like an ox, saving every penny and trying not to cut anything from the business for household needs. Valerio's mother was her husband's true comrade in arms. She stayed at home, taking on all the responsibilities for its management without any assistance. And there was this capricious Luz with her long manicure and boundless ambitions. Valerio, I married the son of a prominent businessman, not a cook. I was hoping for a different level of life in your house, but your mother even washes the dishes herself. I'm leaving. The second beauty appeared in his life several years later. She was also stunningly beautiful, with the added bonus of having an excellent education in London. Living on the shores of foggy Albion, the daughter of one of his partners fancied herself an aristocrat, a lady with impeccable manners. Valerio's habit of casually leaving socks near the bed and going out without a tuxedo, or at least a flawless classic suit, horrified her. She tried to instill in their home the habit of hosting English tea parties with equally pompous girlfriends. Valerio's mother flatly refused to participate in these stuffy gatherings. She hurried to Valerio's younger sister, Alba, to spend extra time with her in the park or read an interesting book. Once, the ceremonial bride couldn't bear it anymore, packed her suitcase, and left on her own. Or rather, home to her parents, who were also big fans of English traditions and rituals. Both of Valerio's young wives never even thought about offspring or having children. They felt much more comfortable in the world without diapers and bottles of infant formula. After 2 failed marriages, Valerio moved on to short, non-committal relationships. He allowed himself even ordinary holiday romances, where the rules of love were always declared up front. They spent time together beautifully at his expense, then broke up. No one owed anything to anyone afterward. He would have considered more serious relationships if any of his temporary girlfriends had gotten pregnant, but there were no such reports. So he lived without any worries until he met Christina. Alba, Valerio's younger sister, was his little friend, a bright son, and a companion in all games and amusements. There was a big age difference between them, a whole 15 years. Sometimes, when their parents went out in the evening to the theater or restaurant, they stayed alone together. It was a happy time. Valerio made a pile of hot sandwiches with Doctor's sausage and cheese, so gooey, sticking to their hands. They munched on them, washing them down with tomato juice. Then they watched old cartoons, and both of them loved them. They goofed around, having pillow fights. Alba always fell asleep on her older brother's broad shoulder. And then she died tragically. Valerio didn't know before that he could howl like a wolf at the top of his lungs. His little girl, Alba, his little sister, was crushed by a truck right at a bus stop. Usually, at that time, the family car driven by his father's driver would take Alba to and from school. But this time, she asked the driver to take a walk to see her friend off to the bus, who was carrying home lots of gifts and a bunch of colorful balloons. Later, the bewildered driver, speeding along the road, would try to shift the blame onto those infamous inflatable balloons. He'd say they blocked the entire stop with their mass, but the tests after the accident would show that he still had a lot of yesterday's alcohol in his blood. With such concentration, he could easily have lost the ability to react quickly to a complex road situation. What was the point? In that terrible, cruel car accident, 5 people died on the spot. Valerio, who arrived at the place before his parents, wouldn't see Alba's body anymore. He'd only find her red hat with pom-pom and white patterns in a dirty pile of crushed balloons, and nearby, the frightened driver of his father's service car would be pacing around, justifying himself. "I couldn't do anything, Valerio. She begged me to take a walk with her friend. She wanted to help her carry the balloons. And now they're both gone. I'll never forgive myself for this mistake. Then there were his mother's eyes, forever dead. The endless grief of his father, who soon withdrew from business, handing over the reins to his 27-year-old son. Valerio's mother never managed to overcome this tragedy fully. Instead of her beloved daughter, she hugged a doll, trying to fall asleep, looking almost insane. One day, he found his mother reading fairy tales to the same doll. Examination at the clinic showed that the woman was perfectly sane, but she was fading away quietly with each passing day. She claimed that Alba came to her in dreams at night, complaining that she was scared alone in the pitch black, cold darkness and calling for her mother to save her. Valerio's mother listened to her. One morning she didn't get out of bed, and 3 days later, she left forever. Her husband, who found her, was shocked to see her happily smiling as if her cherished dream had finally come true. She and her daughter were together again. The truck driver was convicted and given a long sentence, but it couldn't bring back the dead. For some time, Valerio couldn't bring himself to drive. Not out of fear. The image was always before his eyes, the balloons, the hat, the red pom-pom, Alba laughing, throwing a pillow at him, and dozens of wreaths of white and crimson roses on his mother's grave. Now everything associated with cars and roads was forever something very painful for him. That's why he was so anxious whenever his wife, Christina, got behind the wheel again. He didn't even like to watch the process. He would move away from the garage. He wasn't afraid of anything else in life, but he couldn't overcome this. Camila was sitting in the pastry shop, where Ottilio had brought her. She smeared chocolate on the surface of the saucer with a teaspoon, which was poured over the appetizing pastry. She was debating with herself whether to tell her friend the important news. Her trust in her friend outweighed it, and she began this difficult conversation. "Ottilio, I'm pregnant." The young man froze, not managing to bring the cup of coffee to his mouth. And then suddenly burst out with curses. "What are you talking about? Do you have another male? Did he prove to be more attractive than me? I'm friends with you only out of pity for your orphaned fate. Do you remember Saint-Exupéry's legendary saying in The Little Prince? We are responsible for those we have tamed. So, I've tamed you like a homeless, unwanted puppy." Camila didn't even know how to describe the emotions she was feeling right now. Was it disappointment, surprise, or pain? She had been thrown out of the common circle so often in this life that she felt small again, lying in a cardboard box without even a soft, warm blanket, hoping that the baby wouldn't survive. She was dying inside now, another betrayal on her head. How many more of these life losses would there be? She didn't bother to explain anything. Her confession about the terrible incident in the hospital storage room would hardly change Ottilio's attitude towards her. He had already signed and executed the verdict on their friendship. And was there any friendship between them at all? Camila got up from the table and headed for the exit of the sweet, cozy establishment. Once again, she was thrown onto the streets of life like an unwanted puppy that didn't appeal to its owner. Of course, it didn't occur to her that Ottilio might suddenly turn out to be a noble knight. He would marry her to save her from the shame of being an unwed mother, and he would take responsibility for the children. Nowadays, single mothers aren't considered something extraordinary or rare. She had a place to live. It was cramped, but good anyway. Unexpectedly, the head of the entire medical department called Camila to his office, closed the door, and cleared his throat. "Camila, I have a delicate task for you. A few days ago, an unusual patient was admitted for treatment, a close friend and sponsor of our hospital. He has stage 4 stomach cancer. It's one of those cases where a miracle won't happen. The metastases have already spread in various directions, and the organs and tissues around the affected area are compromised, causing him severe pain. He's lying alone in the VIP ward. He told me that he came here to die under supervision. He's a strong-willed man, very resilient, without whims or tantrums. He doesn't want to burden his family. He has no children, his father is old, and his beautiful wife, on the contrary, is young. That's the situation. Normally, Marta handles this ward, but she requested leave at her own expense. She's taking her son to a sanatorium on the doctor's urgent recommendation. The boy has asthma. I helped her find a suitable medical facility by the seaside. The last name of your new ward is Alonso, and his name is Valerio. Please treat him with all the tenderness and attention you're capable of. He's a worthy man. People like him are the backbone of our society. He's not a snob or arrogant, despite his considerable wealth. Find common ground with him. I want him to be as comfortable as possible with us, even in his hopeless condition. Don't worry, I'll do everything as needed. You can trust me. Camila sadly smiled and continued, dying alone without the support of loved ones is a terrible fate. I know all too well what loneliness feels like in a crowd of strangers. It's even better if they're not completely indifferent personalities. It takes great courage to take such a step. The head of the department felt that there was such an overt sadness in the voice of one of his best nurses that a shiver ran down his spine. But at that moment, he was distracted by a phone call, and he immediately forgot about his fleeting sensation. Camila hurried to leave the boss's office, wanting to avoid wasting the boss's time. Camila entered room number 10 prepared. She was smiling, her medical uniform was without a single wrinkle, and she was holding a device for convenient foreplacement in her hands. Valerio's reaction to her appearance in the room was strange. He stared at the nurse with wide eyes, as if he had seen a ghost. She almost dropped the 4 at the sight of him. She forgot all the words she wanted to say to him from the doorstep and began to stutter. "Good afternoon. I'm your new nurse. Marta took leave. My name is Camila. Do you have any requests or preferences at the moment?" Her patient continued to remain somewhat stunned, then regained his composure, forced a smile, and explained. "You bear a striking resemblance to my younger sister, so I was a bit taken aback at first. I don't have any requests or preferences at the moment. If needed, I'll call you." Valerio desperately wanted Camila to disappear quickly. Tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't want anyone to witness his weakness. He was truly amazed. Camila had Alba's face, only older. The same gray eyes, framed by fluffy lashes, have similar eyebrow and lip lines. He thought that if Camila saw his mother now, she would faint. Even their figures were identical. True, Alba would be around 40 now, and this girl was much younger. Yet the resemblance was striking. Valerio thought that Camila could look like Alba's daughter. How sad and irreversible it all was. When such encounters occur in life, they inevitably lead to various ambiguous thoughts. This fate did not bypass Camila's patient at the moment. After her departure, he immediately called his father and asked him to come to the hospital. He said he would explain immediately why it was so urgent. The elderly man hurried over, and under the guise of a good deed, Valerio invited his new nurse into the room. "Camila, my father is here. Would you mind brewing us 2 cups of coffee?" He watched his father's facial expressions closely but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, 2 men were talking honestly with each other. "Dad, did you notice how much this girl resembles Alba, who passed away? When I first saw her, I couldn't believe my eyes." "Of course, I noticed. I even thought right away, son, whether you left traces of one of your love affairs somewhere." "Father, we've never talked about personal matters before. I'll tell you I have no connection to Camila. I've been working in serious security for a long time. After breaking up with another woman, she's assigned to follow us for a few months to see if any of them become pregnant after our encounters. I've always wanted a child, but it never worked out. So, if any of my lovers turned out to be pregnant, I would definitely take part in the future with her and the baby. I have a reciprocal question for you. Mom has been gone for many years. I only know one of your companions, Ofelia Santos. Maybe you had other women? Please don't consider my curiosity idle and tactless. I was just so struck when this new nurse appeared. No, son, I had no one but Ofelia. We met when I was almost 50, she's almost my age. She saved me from grief over my wife and daughter and turned out to be a faithful, decent friend. Naturally, we were close, but we never thought about having a child. Ophelia already had a son, almost the same age as you were then. It's time to expect grandchildren, not to become parents ourselves. Valerio pondered. He couldn't shake off the grip of uncertainty. He was searching for an answer to why Camila resembled his deceased sisters so much. He put forward a new hypothesis. Dad, could this girl be our distant relative? Once again, his father's response was negative. We don't have many blood relatives, as far as I know, neither on my side nor on your mother's. I know all my distant nieces and nephews by heart. Yes, they live very far from here. Throughout our life together with your mother, we met no more than 2 or 3 times, and then we lost touch altogether. Life separated us far from each other. Suddenly, a thought struck Valerio, which he immediately voiced to his father. Let's not read tea leaves. I'll instruct my security service to gather a complete dossier on this nurse, and then everything will become clear. They agreed on that. And just then, Camila entered with the coffee. The men questioned her for a while, asking how long she had been working in this department and which educational institution she had graduated from. The girl told them everything in detail with a smile, even how she bandaged a boy's scraped knee in the orphanage and then fell in love with medicine. They parted amicably. Both sides knew how to find common ground with strangers. After the nurse left, the father and son firmly decided to find out who Camila's parents were and where she came from. The next day, Valerio gave an order to his security chief regarding this matter. No one could have imagined that the nurse's story would turn out to be such a tough nut to crack. The report on the trip to the town where the little girl's house was located was lying on Valerio's bed just 3 days later. He carefully examined all the documents and was shocked. Law enforcement agencies and his brave men couldn't find any traces of a newborn girl left in an old cardboard box near the children's institution. For Camila, her patient, who had significant connections, and for the whole world, the girl's origin remained a complete mystery. Valerio was forced to admit that here he was powerless. Money can't always buy everything. They couldn't uncover the mystery of who Camila's parents were. Nothing was interesting or criminal in the girl's life, even after leaving the orphanage. From the orphanage in the regional center until the end of high school, training at the local medical school, graduating with honors, a room in an apartment. She started working in the oncology department of the city hospital, and then she had some romantic affairs with an emergency room doctor. That's it. Camila's biography was as tiny as she was. The only mystical thing about her was her appearance in the orphanage for newborns. Everything else was simple and transparent. Camila ran down the corridor after a man refused to wear a gown and shoe covers. He behaved extremely rudely and agitatedly, demanding to be shown the room where Mr. Valerio Alonso was lying. The nurse couldn't allow a scandal, but the visitor was looking for Valerio with no good intentions. Into room number 10 burst Camila, accompanied by the unclear guest. He immediately rushed to the patient's bed. What followed was horrible. Enraged by something, the visitor ran up to Valerio, grabbed his hand, and shouted in fury. So, being rich gives you the freedom to do anything? I hate it. I would spit in your face. Camila tried to shield Valerio, but the deranged visitor roughly shoved her aside. Don't get in the way. I need to talk to this arrogant jerk and look into his shameless eyes since his wife is hiding from me behind the high fence of her private property. Valerio was completely bewildered. He asked quietly, "What happened? How did Christina offend or hurt you?" The man froze for a second, then plunged back into the fray. Offended? Hurt? Is that what you call it now? She destroyed me, taking away my loved ones. Camila and her patient couldn't understand anything. Both mentally decided to let the man speak his mind. My wife was crossing the road at a pedestrian crossing on a green light, pushing our youngest daughter in a stroller, holding the hand of our eldest son. Your wife's car hit all 3 of them at high speed, not giving them a chance to survive. Do you know what it's like to lose 3 of the most beloved people in one go? Valerio felt a sense of déjà vu, a halt, balloons, a red knitted hat, emptiness, and coldness inside. Could it be some kind of mistake? Christina couldn't commit such a horrific crime. She loved cars and speed, but to hit a person. It couldn't have happened because it could never happen. The visitor nervously twitched, staring at his wealthy enemy. Have you already decided that your beautiful wife is an angel in the flesh? She can't turn into a demon. So gentle, fragile, and ethereal. I went to see her, just like you, to look into her eyes. To understand how she could not help the victims. To flee the scene of the crime. And you, it seems, are kept in the dark. She takes care of her nerves. When they found her through the surveillance camera recordings and identified the owner of the car, she hired a gang of lawyers. They first detained her, but then almost immediately released her. She's sitting in your house now, not showing her face outside, drowning her wounds in wine. Ask me how I know all this. Some people came forward, told me, and even showed me the recording. Valerio couldn't believe his ears. Christina was well aware of the tragedy involving his younger sister. About how he had been avoiding cars ever since, only using transportation when necessary. His wife couldn't have been reckless on the road like that. It was nonsense, absurd, and a fabrication. He didn't argue with the man. He could see that he was broken by the tragedy that had befallen him. He didn't offer money as compensation. It would be inappropriate now. He would figure out how to help later. Camila, who had become an unwitting witness to the man's monologue, didn't know how to behave. On one hand, as an employee of a heavy oncology department, she should have protected her patient from such intrusions. On the other hand, in such a situation, it would be cruel not to let two people talk about the accident and its consequences. Meanwhile, the visitor began to gather himself, slumped, turned black, and hunched over, as if he had completed some difficult mission and was now free. He left without saying goodbye. He could barely move and was suddenly exhausted. Valerio was gloomy, deeply lost in thought about something tormenting him. Later, Camila accidentally overheard a snippet of his conversation on the phone. He was giving instructions to the security service to obtain footage of the accident and transfer it to a tablet. On that day, Camila was on duty, assisting the girls at the reception when the ambulance arrived. Otilio was in the crew, and he didn't hesitate to be sarcastic. I see our future mommy is living and working in quite tranquilly. Well, this won't last long. He snorted contemptuously and disappeared, but it was already too late. The nurse, overhearing their conversation, grabbed Camila by the arm. Camila, are you pregnant? Just yesterday at lunch in the cafeteria, I thought about you being so petite but eating like you're eating for two. For three, Camila didn't mince her words. I'm expecting twins, 16 weeks along. Her colleague was taken aback, immediately bombarding her with questions. Wait, isn't Otilio the father of the babies? Everyone in the department thinks you two are in love and that you're together. And he just looked at you with disdain now. Did you cheat on him? Camila looked down. The father of my future children is not Otilio, it just happened that way. Let's close this topic, it's unpleasant for me. I'll be grateful if this conversation stays between us. My clothes have almost become too tight for me. I've started wearing a uniform one size larger, and soon everyone will know that I'm expecting a child. Let it be later rather than sooner. Almost nearing nightfall, Camila suddenly remembered Otilio's cutting remarks and burst into tears. The fatigue of nearly a day's duty took its toll, and the workday had been quite hectic. At the most inconvenient moment, a call came from room number 10. She barely had time to wipe away her tears. Valerio was a perceptive man. He noticed the tear-stained eyes of the nurse immediately. But first, he just reminded her that his painkiller injection was due soon. He asked for it to be administered a bit earlier. He couldn't bear the pain any longer. Camila checked the schedule. There were only 20 minutes left until the injection. She thought, God, how does he endure all this terrible agony? Such a courageous man, yet he can't endure it. 15 minutes later, she went in to check if her patient was feeling any better. She was about to leave, convinced that he was feeling relieved, but he suddenly took her hand. "And now, Camila, will you tell me why you cried today?" His tone wasn't commanding. On the contrary, there was so much compassion in it that she couldn't hold back, as if a dam of emotions had burst somewhere inside her. She told him everything, about her absurd romance with Otilio, about the audacious Salvador who attacked her on her day off, taking advantage of her confusion and fear of confronting the influential surgeon, about her pregnancy and the twins who were due to arrive. Valerio was enraged. "Tomorrow we'll sort things out in your filthy story. And I'll make sure to put the disgusting nephew of your doctor behind bars for his actions. I have the power and the money for it, believe me." Camila pleaded. "Please, don't. I like working here. I'll be left without a job and no means to live after such a loud scandal." Valerio looked closely at the young woman, whom he was now about to interfere with under the influence of the anticipation of news about the accident from his security service. All this time, after the departure of the man accusing his wife of a bloody crime, he had been on pins and needles. Tomorrow, he would know the truth, whether Christina was guilty of something or not. The head of the department did not dare to refuse Valerio's unclear request to meet with one of the surgeons. He decided not to interrupt their conversation. Perhaps the important patient wanted to consult with this specialist again. It was his right. Unfortunately, in such an advanced situation, even the most magical surgery couldn't do wonders. The sick man was already 1 foot in the grave. Medicine was completely powerless here. The head of the department would have been extremely surprised if he had heard Valerio's conversation with his colleague. Valerio didn't beat around the bush, he went straight to the point. "I know that you used your position to help your nephew get a health exemption from military service. Do you know what he did?" The woman first paled, then began to blush. She asked quietly, "What are you talking about? What did he do?" "He committed a crime, vile, despicable. He attacked a nurse, and now she's expecting a baby, or rather, 2 babies. Such offenses are punished by the criminal code. Do you believe that my influence will be enough to put him away for a long time? I guess you're aware of what happens in prison with such arrogant young men. They are taught a lesson for the future so that they never forget what it's like to be a helpless victim. This can't be. Salvador is a nice, well-mannered boy. I'll invite him to the hospital right now. Let him confirm my words in front of you, that it's some mistake, a false accusation. As a doctor, you are well aware that a DNA test of your relative and the unborn babies will quickly resolve any doubts. But I'll meet you halfway. I want to personally look the guy in the eye and hear his explanation." Salvador arrived at the hospital at his aunt's request in complete bewilderment. The surprise turned out to be harsh. In room number 10, Valerio was waiting for him, the senior relative, Camila, who was trying to stop everyone, and the head of Valerio's security service. The conversation was tough, but the guy couldn't resist for long. He confessed to everything. "I don't know what came over me. It was like a cloud in my mind. I'm ready to marry the aggrieved girl, especially since she's expecting children from me." Camila recoiled. "Please don't punish me even more, Valerio. I can't stand him. He's physically and morally repulsive to me. I'll raise my children on my own, without that monster." Salvador was bewildered. "Will they put me in jail now, Auntie? I won't survive in prison. They'll break me and destroy me there." Valerio pondered for a moment, then delivered his verdict. "Since Camila doesn't want anything to do with such an unpleasant person, we'll handle this differently. You'll go to the army, and I'll make sure it happens as soon as possible." He turned to his subordinate. "Take care of it immediately, and now leave my room." He pointed to the door for the female surgeon and her nephew. "There's no crime without punishment. This young man will regret his ugly deed for a long time, and I'll personally ensure that." When Camila and the unfortunate relatives left the room, he eagerly turned to his assistant. "What about the task? Are there any results from the investigation of the road accident?" The security guard, looking downcast and avoiding eye contact, replied, "Boss, I'll connect you with the investigator. I'm afraid you won't like the news. Expect a video call, and I'll leave the room for now." Valerio grabbed the tablet, and the video call session didn't keep him waiting. He wished he didn't know or see any of this. On the screen was a close-up of a terrible accident and his wife's drunken smirk. The test results showed so much alcohol in her bloodstream that it was as if she had consumed at least half a bottle of brandy or whiskey before getting behind the wheel. He was struck and defeated by this scene. There was not a hint of remorse on his wife's beautiful face. Had he lived with such a soulless monster for all these years? The next recording was a questioning of Christina in a separate windowless room. For a moment, he felt sorry for her, but that darkness quickly dissipated. He didn't know this side of his wife. The young beauty cynically argued to the two interrogators that drinking a little wine was trivial and couldn't affect her focus on the road. And then she said a phrase that made Valerio's hair stand on end. "You all remind me of my husband here. He's been carrying memories of the accident where his sister died for so many years. It was her fate. And he, like a fool, sheds tears and visits the grave with flowers." Valerio shrank with hatred. What he saw on the screen couldn't happen to him. He loved and worshipped this woman. He thought they were two halves of one whole. They were meant for each other, and they were the perfect husband and wife. It all turned out to be an illusion and deceit, a mistake. She betrayed all his feelings. She only pretended to share his suffering and longing for his sister and mother. She desired him and his millions. Some unsettling details and trivia immediately came to his mind. Christina, who never wanted to have children, brushed off his requests on the matter as naive jokes. She talked about how she hadn't yet had her fill of him alone and didn't want to share him with anyone, pouting capriciously and rushing to hug and kiss him. He allowed this woman everything. He softened like only a deeply in love man can in another life known as a very severe, serious type. At home, he relaxed, let everything flow freely, and let his wife rule as she pleased, as long as she was with him. Valerio reviewed all the video recordings several times. He didn't memorize them but got used to paying attention to details. He realized that even during Christina's interrogation, she was intoxicated. Somehow, he thought, she's celebrating my imminent departure and her future wealthy freedom. I need to review the will urgently, do it thoughtfully, and consider every step in that direction. Camila quietly entered the room, holding a huge basket of flowers. "Valerio, I'm sorry that I came here unexpectedly. Salvador sent me flowers and a big, sweet gift. I gave the cake and candies to the nurses without mentioning the sender, but I didn't have the heart to throw away the flowers. They're still alive and innocent. Can I put them in your room?" The man looked at her, and a new plan was forming in his mind. He replied to his nurse, "Camila, I'm not thrilled about Salvador's generosity either, but indeed, the flowers shouldn't perish because of it. Put them on the windowsill. I need to have a serious conversation with you. I'll need your active assistance." Christina was furious that she got caught up in some nonsense. Her carefully crafted operation to achieve the ultimate goal was falling apart. Where did this woman with children come from on that fateful crosswalk? She and her friend were chatting in the bar and didn't even realize they had drunk quite a bit of whiskey with just one ice cube. They didn't dilute the amber liquid with anything. When she got into the car, her head was spinning a little. But she had so often driven drunk that she didn't consider it a serious obstacle to the trip. In such an expensive car with such shady license plates, she practically never got stopped by traffic police. Her journey to the next day was long. A crucial meeting was scheduled in Valerio's room. His instructions regarding the will had to be formalized and signed. Her husband didn't have long to live, and dealing with his old man, that harmful old man, would be quick. It took more than 10 years to be left alone with Valerio's millions. To live for herself with her aging sick husband and with some young macho with a pleasant, everlasting body, strong and daring. She had no real reason to complain about her husband. He was also of that breed of man, strong-willed, passionate, strong, and decisive. The problem was that he was born too early to be her chosen one and was already finishing his journey on this earth. The significant age difference between them always oppressed her. She couldn't let loose in a nightclub with peers or appear in a young company with such a daddy, even though he was her legal husband. Her friends used to say, "Christina, fear God, he blows the dust off you, showers you with gifts, doesn't deny anything, and fulfills any wish." But her husband's worship was not enough for her. Christina believed that, for her unearthly beauty, not only expensive packaging was needed. A true lover should have been worthy of her. She would live comfortably on the inheritance she received after her husband's death. Fortunately, she never bore Valerio's child, so there would be no freeloaders on his riches. The woman uncorked another bottle of wine and smiled predatorily. With her stunning appearance, she even managed to charm a fashionable lawyer, quickly resolving her detention issue for a ridiculous fee. It would be very inconvenient if Valerio didn't find out about this silly accident until he finally signed the will. Of course, she could convince him that she was not guilty and that it was a setup against his poor girl. But her husband's perceptiveness was undeniable, and this matter was also related to an expensive car. She had been persuading him for over a year to agree to give her favorite swallow. Red, elegant, with stylish design in the cabin, the envy of all her friends and a consolation for her life with an aging husband. Christina prepared for the hospital visit with special care. Her husband had to be struck by her beauty from the threshold, once again understanding what happiness and sunshine he had in her as his companion. The crimson trouser suit, snow-white blouse, and high-heeled pumps further emphasized the boundless length of her legs. She had red hair tied up in a fluffy ponytail and wore small ruby earrings in her ears. It was a gift from Valerio, and love and devotion in her green eyes. A little of his favorite cologne on her wrist, and there she was, ready, the epitome of a perfect woman, any man's dream, belonging to him alone, her betrothed. Picking up her purse from the chair, Christina peacefully flew to the hospital, hoping for the best. Today, in the history of her long labors and expectations, a bold victory of cunning and beauty over male trust and foolishness would finally be put in place. In the courtyard of the house, the woman surveyed their family nest with pleasure, once again thinking, "I will be a quite wealthy widow." Christina began to bend her delicate fingers with a bright red, flawless manicure, mentally reviewing her assets. A thriving company, which her husband shares with a reliable, time-tested partner and also a family friend. A country house in a secluded corner of the Black Sea coast, where she and Valerio loved to disappear for a couple of days. Their permanent residence was a house in the suburbs, built in the style of a chalet somewhere in the Swiss Alps. They also had a cute little house on the Mediterranean, where Christina loved to visit with her friend, traveled to fashion houses in Paris and Milan, and then returned under the shade of the lush Alps and orange trees. 3 apartments in the city against this background seemed like a mere trifle, but they were also made in the best traditions of modern classic design. A couple of cars were in the garage for business and ceremonial outings, and a whole floor in the house was arranged as a dressing room. Appearing 2 days in a row in the same outfit somewhere Christina considered tactless, she loved bright baubles with lots of stones, the more, the better. She remembered her sin, occasionally visiting her in the form of a secret reproach of an awakened conscience. After meeting Valerio back then in Sicily, they still lived separately for a while, and she continued her commitments to advertising contracts. The list included work in hot Tunisia, where colleagues persuaded her to go on a tour of the Sahara Desert. After spending the night in a hotel in one of the oases amidst sand and salty wastelands, they took them to the Eastern market for souvenirs. Away from everyone, an ugly old woman was sitting on the ground in rags, selling spices and herbs. When Christina approached her, she suddenly grinned maliciously and spoke in the purest French, which the in-demand model knew quite well. "Looking for something special, miss? I have something for you. Buy this dried, fragrant herb from me. Cook meat and fish with it for your beloved, and he will be glued to you, unable to tear himself away. It's not expensive, just $100 for the whole big pack." Christina laughed in response. What did you come up with, old witch? I'll charm my man with the power of my charms myself. I'll manage without you. The Sahara Desert dweller smirked. And what will you do when he gets tired of you? Slip poison into his drink? Take my herb, don't be stubborn. People like you want things to go their way in their lives. There will come a time when, with the help of my seasoning, you'll be able to burn everything inside your man, and it will look like a terrible disease, not poisoning. Just don't overdo it. Don't put more than a pinch in your dishes, or you'll ruin your cavalier prematurely. Christina's further actions were strange. She was like under a spell. She bought the seasoning from the old witch. During the tour, as their group was taken on a jeep ride through the dunes, she never let go of the bag, sitting in the front seat. It seemed to her that her purchase was alive, warming her with an unknown, promising warmth. Later, when welcoming Valerio into her cozy apartment, she always seasoned dinner with small pieces of the herb, and he praised her cooking. Their nights were hot and tender, they were melting into each other. In those still happy times, Christina soon forgot about the old woman's warnings. Then there was marriage, a couple of blissful romantic years together, and suddenly, almost on a whim, Christina began to tire of her supposedly old husband. A quarter-century age gap between a man and a woman is an abyss. Should such a marriage have been called a misalliance? Valerio and Christina never thought about it. Or maybe only he didn't, and she, having paid $100 for her bright future, took the first step towards cunning calculation. Christina started seasoning his food again about 2 years ago. Her goal was not his death, she wasn't that cunning. Rather, it could be called an attempt to revive and paint their relationship in bright colors. After dishes cooked personally by his wife, her husband would come alive, be particularly tender and passionate, and remain in a happy mood for a long time. And then, like thunder from a clear sky, a terrible fatal illness appeared. It manifested itself with obvious symptoms too late. Forever busy, Valerio turned to doctors when nothing could be done anymore. He decided to die alone in the hospital, out of sight of his wife. And Christina was very grateful to him for this act. Learning the news of his illness, she drank herself into oblivion. And then she recovered, accepted the news, and resigned herself. She returned to her former carefree life and patiently waited. At 10 in the morning, in room number 10, a lot of people gathered around Valerio. Christina arrived with a notary. She did not expect to see such a large assembly before her. The head of the security service, one of his subordinates, Valerio's father, and his business partner appeared unaccompanied. Everyone was surprised that they had been gathered together, but they didn't show it. The sick man didn't keep them in the dark for long. He delivered a whole speech. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you taking the time to come see me in the hospital. I want to share incredible news with you. Recently, my security service confirmed one of my assumptions at my request. It traced the footsteps of my wild youth. I found my adult daughter in a small town. I will now introduce her to you. Valerio pressed the nurse call button. Everyone except the representative of the security service looked at each other in amazement. Camila entered the room, and Valerio affectionately ushered her to the center of the room. Don't be shy, daughter. These are the closest people to me. This is Camila. Please welcome her, Valerio said. The faces of the people present in the room reflected different emotions. Christina was stunned, and Valerio's father didn't understand anything. After all, they had exactly established that Camila had no family ties with them. The family friend was shocked too. He had known them for many years and remembered Alba. Now, standing in front of him was her adult copy, which made him shiver. Genetics are indeed intricate. This girl repeated some almost forgotten features of the gloriously deceased girl. Only the notary, who knew about all the changes in the will in advance, remained silent. His face was impassive, as required by professional ethics. Camila silently smiled, playing the role of Valerio's daughter. This was not the most impossible request from him to her. And only she knew how much it hurt him. With the exceptional permission of the attending physician, she even injected him with a stronger painkiller. Tomorrow, the man would pay for it with separate torments, but for now, Thanks to her efforts, he was doing fine. After the altercation with Salvador, she wanted to do something nice for Valerio. So why not participate in this strange prank? Meanwhile, Valerio, tired of the crowd, continued. Camila makes coffee for all of us. We bought a wonderful cake with her, and now I would like to have a private conversation with my wife and my friends. I hope you will wait in the hall during this time. Christina didn't like this start. Why was the notary also told to leave? All of this looked extremely strange and not at all like the usual behavior of her husband, who loved her endlessly. And he didn't torture her with mysteries, he immediately clearly stated his position. Christina, I know everything about the crime you committed on the road. About your cruelty and indifference to the dead. About how all these years you have pretended to understand and cherish my memories of my sister and mother. I hate lies and hypocrisy. God will judge you. And I simply changed the terms of the will. After my death, you won't be destitute. I have appointed you a permanent monthly allowance of 3,000 conditional units. You will have to forget about the rest of the inheritance, or else I will do everything possible to put you behind bars. So far, my millions have managed to halt all legal proceedings against you, but this process is reversible. What? The woman jumped up from her chair angrily. Have you gone mad from all those injections your daughter's giving you? By the way, how did she end up here in the nurse's room? Are you trying to trick me? Tell me. Her voice suddenly turned as sweet as syrup and as sticky as mountain honey, into which the clear bells of her former shrillness had been dipped. Christina decided to change tactics and make one more attempt to fix everything. She hugged her husband, nuzzling her nose against his shoulder, and purred. Oh, my dear, this unbearable pain has changed you. I'm not to blame for what happened, it's a fatal coincidence. I just couldn't handle it. Valerio looked at his wife, feeling as though he had just had his rose-colored glasses cracked and shattered over him, leaving glass shards to wound his soul. It was as if the darkness was dispersing, the obsession was fading away, and the love for his former feelings was donning its mourning attire. He only now realized that Christina had been playing the role of a loving wife all her life, skillfully controlling his heart like a puppeteer controls a puppet. Love can be very cruel. Realizing that her feigned performance did not affect Valerio, Christina abruptly turned on her heels and stormed out of the room in anger. She didn't bother waiting for the coffee that Camilo was still brewing in the mini kitchen. Instead, she hissed angrily in the ear of the notary. We'll meet again in court later. Christina would not return to Valerio, not on this day nor in the following weeks. Meanwhile, Camilo would have a conversation with her father and the nurse, during which he would explain what his wife had done and why he staged it with the will. In a couple of days, he would succumb, slipping into a semi-conscious state and writhing in pain, which now finally claimed its rights over him. Rodrigo sat outside room number 7, where his mother lay. Perplexed, tired, and angry. His mother was getting worse and worse, and he didn't know how to help her. He couldn't bear to look into her eyes, in which insane pain splashed around. It was too early for the next injection. He looked at his watch, but the hands seemed reluctant to move forward. A minute felt like an eternity. Doctors bustled around the room diagonally across from the one with the number 10 sign, with the pretty nurse always rushing somewhere. She dragged a device with a drip to that room, then something in a glass from thin transparent glass. He tried to get her attention, to remind her that his mother was due for an injection in 10 minutes, but the girl looked right through him with unseeing eyes, mumbled something incomprehensible, and dashed off again. He needn't have worried. 10 minutes later, the nurse appeared in his mother's room, kindly adjusting her bedding, administering the injection, and taking her temperature. Then she turned to Rodrigo. You haven't left here for a whole day. I noticed you haven't eaten anything all day. Your mother will feel better for a couple of hours now. Come with me to the nurse's room. I'll have some coffee and sandwiches with you. I had breakfast today after all, at 12. Oh no, I don't want to burden you, Rodrigo replied, suddenly feeling ravenous. I wanted to bring a snack from home, but I left it on the table. I was in a hurry. I think our cat has already found it. I don't know about the bread, but the sausage is gone. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the corridor. Camila quickly ran there, and then, after a few minutes, returned with a mournful tone, saying, "Valerio has passed away. He was such a kind-hearted patient. I took care of him like he was my father. And he jokingly called me his daughter, and now I feel like I've lost a close person. I'll never get used to this in this department." Camila caught herself. "What's your name?" "Rodrigo." "Don't listen to me, Rodrigo. I'm just chatty from exhaustion. Many of our patients are discharged and well treated. Let's go, after all, and have some coffee. I'm on duty until morning, but my patient doesn't need me anymore. I'll help you and your mother." In psychology, there's a concept called the companion effect. It's when unfamiliar people in transportation, on the road, or on a long journey start pouring out their hearts to a random companion. That's what happened with the companion effect during Camila's shift that night. She told Rodrigo everything about herself. He told her about being an orphan briefly, but not for long. The woman who was now spending her last days in room number 7 had adopted him, raised him, and educated him. Now he was about to finish university and stop working as a part-time courier in a pizza parlor in the evenings. He would find a decent job for himself, but he didn't have time to help her. She had drawn everything out of him, his aptitude for math and programming. He was talented and promising. If he felt a pang of pain in his side, it was nothing, it would pass. As long as her son was studying well, she would endure. Now he didn't know how to repay this filial debt. He tried to be there all the time, but what was the use? The train of hope had departed, and he had to accept it and come to terms with it. From that night on, Rodrigo and Camila often chatted whenever she had a free moment. They were together when his mother opened her eyes for the last time and weakly smiled, saying, "Everything will be all right, son, believe in it." After finishing university, Rodrigo began to visit Camila, especially when he had evenings free from his courier rounds around the city. They went to the movies, strolled in the park, ate ice cream on a bench, and talked a lot. That's how two lonely, destitute souls met and began to support each other. He knew that a week after Valerio's death, his family, including Camila, was gathering at the notary's office. Valerio left the majority of his real estate in equal shares to his father and his recently found daughter. Instead of herself, Christina sent her lawyer to the meeting, with whom she was already having a passionate affair. Rodrigo didn't want to pursue Camila now, even though he liked the young woman. He had to stand on his own 2 feet first and then think about courting her. Camila suspected his feelings for her, and yet her pregnancy distracted all her thoughts, and work became increasingly difficult. She was noticeably rounded out, resembling a cute little bear cub. In a testamentary disclaimer, Valerio left his assets in the company to his partner on the condition that all the profits from his share would go to the accounts of the trauma department of the city hospital. Soon, they were able to afford to buy new diagnostic equipment there. Perhaps someday it would save someone who came after a serious road accident. Within the allotted time, Camila went on maternity leave. Now she could afford not to work. Her immediate plans included the dream of finishing medical school. She even retrieved old textbooks on chemistry and biology from the far shelf. Thank goodness, she no longer thought about the financial future of her sons. Valerio's gift would allow her to raise children who would become worthy members of society. However grandiose it might sound, Camila wanted her children to enter this world, not in a cardboard box. The second ultrasound showed that she was carrying twin boys. The 3 of them would be a real family. Valerio's legal service was instructed to assist the young woman in all matters related to her new property. The character and habits of the future mother remained unchanged. The sudden wealth that had fallen on her did not make her hardened, self-assured, or indifferent to people. Only the emergency room doctor, Otilio, couldn't live peacefully. He bit his elbows for being so foolish as to miss out on the wealthy heiress. Who would have thought that she would turn out to be the daughter of a millionaire? And he had always sneered at her orphanhood. One fine day, Otilio decided to visit Camila again at her old apartment. In one of her new apartments, where she planned to move after leaving the maternity hospital, they were now setting up a nursery for the two little ones, and she was leisurely packing her things. When there was a sharp knock at the door, the woman thought the movers had forgotten something. Standing at the threshold was Otilio. "Camila, I've come to make amends. You misunderstood me back then. I've always been sincere with you. You misinterpreted my words. I'm not holding a grudge against you, but you're too late, Otilio. I'm getting married soon. Let me introduce you to my future husband. Rodrigo, come here, please." Rodrigo emerged from the room into the corridor, staring at them both in bewilderment. Camila immediately explained, "My love, my ex just stopped by for a visit. I told him the news that we're getting married in a month. You don't mind that I happily shared it with an old friend, do you?" She tiptoed and planted an imaginary kiss on the lips of her fiancé. Otilio glared angrily at them both and rushed out of the apartment into the stairwell, the door slammed shut behind him. "What's it, Camila? I don't understand. Are you proposing to me?" Rodrigo asked, confused. "Are you against it?" The woman countered. "You'll never make the first move, and it's getting late for us with the boys. You wouldn't hesitate to take all three of us, would you?" "I'd be honored." Rodrigo beamed with a smile. Two lonely people were not alone in this world anymore. Happiness comes in different forms, everyone has their share. This family will surely make it. Who would have doubted it?
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.